To the PFF NFL show. Trevor, Sikkema, Max, Chadwick, Dalton Wasserman here with you guys to recap day one of the 2025 NFL Scouting Combine. We got a lot of things to talk about. I mean, the coaches and general managers were at the podium today. We learned a lot of stuff. Day one, it always feels like it's like a massive news dump. You know, whether it's Schefter or Rappaport tweeting something about a contract or one of these players becoming available on the cusp of free agency, or what we get to learn from the GMs and the coaches at the podium. It just feels like there is so much shakeup from what we have been talking about over the last couple of weeks when it comes to the 2025 NFL Draft. Fellas, how are we feeling today?
I'm honored to be next to you. According to Nate Sharp in the chat, you are a GOAT alongside of Tom Brady and Michael Jordan. I wonder what his player comps for Dalton and I are. Probably not too great.
No, but, it's Tom Brady and Michael Jordan. It's you guys. You guys are the legends here, and then, it's just my name.
I consider myself more of a Brian Scalabrine than anything else, nice. But I appreciate it.
That's a great reference, by the way.
Hey, integral part of a championship?
He was, yeah.
Did he win a championship?
I think so. Wasn't he on that Celtics team with Garnett and Pierce? Isn't that right?
You know, we'll go with it. We got nods from behind the camera, so we're actually going to go with it here. I'm excited for this one. I hope you guys are as well. It's day one, so obviously we have a ton of energy still for what we're going to see in the Combine. I know a lot of people think about the NFL Scouting Combine for just the drills, right? Mm-hmm. We'll get to that later in the week. They don't start the drills until Thursday, but we'll get that from the first couple of groups of players. We'll hear from the players tomorrow, but again, just guys, there's so much that we learned here in one day, in 3 or 4 hours for these general managers and the coaches, because as much as they want to stay very buttoned up, right? They don't want to give too much away, especially those teams that are picking at the very top of the draft. When you're sitting up there for 15 minutes getting peppered with questions, you're probably going to let a little, little slip here and there. So for that's why I do enjoy. Again, a lot of people just think about the drills, but for me, Combine Week really does start today because of everything we get to learn.
Well, there's two things that come out of these pressers, right? It's storylines and then it's speculation, right? And there's nothing more speculative than what we think these teams are going to do, making franchise-altering picks, especially in the first round of a draft, right? And with all the drills coming this weekend, and you know, we have to remember, and a lot of the GMs and coaches remind us, is they're very early in the process, right? They've been coaching and running teams all year. They haven't really got into the scouting process until the last few weeks, and they're trying to crunch it all into about a 3-month span. So it's one thing that they stress, and all options are on the table for any team, especially when you talk about teams that need guys at key positions, right, at quarterback, at wide receiver, maybe off the edge, in a deep defensive line class. So we just have to keep in mind that for them, it's very early in the process and nothing's set in stone, and the speculation is only going to continue.
I love hearing from first-time general managers and first-time coaches. We got that today. James Glaston from the Jaguars and Liam Cohen both spoke today. I thought both of them were phenomenal at the podium as well. So, yes, we hear from the same coaches year after year, like Andy Reid's always really cool to listen to, obviously. But the first-time coaches, the first-time GMs when they're up there, I think it's really cool to hear from them.
Yeah, we'll bring this up as we kind of have this conversation about a couple of the highlights that we heard from the podium. We've got some clips for you guys, some video for you guys as well as we go throughout the show that we were able to gather. So we'll show those to you guys throughout the show here. But, I think I was standing next to Joe Schoen's podium when he was talking general manager of the New York Giants. And obviously there's a lot of questions that people have with Joe Schoen, you know, this being a big time year for them and that regime. And not only that, but also holding a top 3 overall pick. And Joe Schoen said, somebody had asked him about trades, like, oh, have you thought about like trading up, trading down? And he's like, look, everything's absolutely on the table, which is sort of the buttoned up answer that we want to hear. But then he said, we'll start having a lot of those conversations now, and that's another underrated part of this event is maybe a little less of the shows that you'll watch and listen to here on this channel for this week, but in the weeks that follow, I think things are going to come out, the news to hear, oh, this team talked with this team at the Combine, and now we're talking about this team trading up, this team trading back, so there's just so much that happens. I want to start at the very top of the draft, though, and it's one of the most polarizing players, but in a good way. Sometimes you hear polarizing player and it goes, okay, well, some people think he's really good, some people think he's really bad. Ain't anybody out there that thinks Travis Hunter is bad. It's just a matter of where he's going to play at the NFL level. And we had two teams, the Tennessee Titans and the Cleveland Browns, who both of these organizations have a chance to draft Travis Hunter. The Titans obviously have the top pick at number 1 overall, and the Cleveland Browns have that pick right after them if the Titans were to go a different direction. Brian Callahan talked to us earlier today, and he said he probably starts as a corner for them. So they view Travis Hunter as a corner, but then obviously talked about some offense as well. We've got a little bit of a video clip on him and more of that answer there from Brian Callahan.
He's a unique player. There's not many guys that have played that many snaps on both sides of the ball. And you watch his tape and you see his ability to play both at a very high level. So, I think anybody that you talk to about him is going to say the same thing, that he's got the ability to play both. He probably starts at corner, and then you find ways to interject him in the offense as he gets more comfortable. He plays more and more offensively. But I think his corner is probably his starting point. In my opinion, he might get varying opinions on that, but and I think he's got a real role as a receiver.
So again, that's Titans head coach Brian Callahan talking about what could be a future player there on his roster, and a very talented one in Travis Hunter. Dalton, I'll go to you first. What do you think about Callahan saying, well, we think he's primarily a corner? You've been somebody who has said, hey, let him play both until he proves that he can't play both. But I feel like a lot of teams sort of had that thought process, but obviously the Titans saying corner. My question to you is that if the Titans view him as a corner primarily, does that help or hurt his cause to go number one overall, you think?
I think it hurts it, honestly. Now, I know he's a special athlete, and he's somebody who could play both ways a significant amount in the league. And I think Brian Callahan even stressed it there where, okay, he can play corner. He's probably his primary position's at cornerback. But if he were to play as your second or third wide receiver or get in those obvious passing situations, then maybe you can make use out of him both ways. But I do think the Titans are a team that needs to fix up the offensive side of the ball, right? I think there is a decent base on their defense, especially on their defensive line. Now, there's also been a lot of talk about the Titans with Abdul Carter, and Callahan even got a lot of questions about Carter and what he's looking for in an edge player, so that's also an option. But as far as Hunter goes, I think it would benefit the Titans more if he would play even more receiver, because they're trying to fix up that passing game, right? You're trying to figure out, okay, how do we fix a quarterback situation that was dead last in passing grade last year? Mm-hmm. They don't have a franchise quarterback on their roster. If they take Hunter first overall, there's a pretty good chance that they're not going to have one anyway, and this is an answer we may not have, just like a lot of questions that we need answered by the time free agency comes around, right? We think about what if the Titans are a team looking for Sam Darnold, then Hunter becomes more of an option one way or the other. But I do think the fact that he stressed that he believes Hunter could play both ways is a significant development.
Max, what do you think? Do you think corner helps or hurts the number one overall chances for Travis Hunter?
I'm with Dalton. I think it hurts it if you're thinking, okay, he's primarily going to be a corner and plays packages at wide receiver. Again, it's tough, but I just love the fact that we have so many different answers on this guy from even general managers. It feels like, when you talk to different analysts in this industry, they all have different answers. NFL teams feel the same way. They're like, we don't know what to do with the guy in a good way, right? Because they have so many different ways you could use him. He is absolutely one of the most fascinating prospects of recent memory.
And another one of those general managers that thinks a little bit differently is the general manager of the team picking right behind the Tennessee Titans, the Cleveland Browns at number 2 overall. Andrew Berry, their general manager, said that he thinks that Travis Hunter is primarily a wide receiver first. So this is what he said in his answer talking about Travis Hunter.
I'd say this, in terms of Travis Hunter, cornerback or receiver, the answer is yes. So he can play both, and I think that's what makes him special. We would see him as a receiver primarily first, but I think part of, again, what makes him a bit of a unicorn is the fact that he can do both at a high level. His superpower, they're really his ball skills, and that's a position where you can use it 100 times during the season versus maybe 30 on the high end. But look, we'll have our coaches and scouts fight it out in terms of where he should be on the board, but any team he goes to will be happy to have him.
So Barry there saying that he said the wide receiver part. He said they primarily look at him as a wide receiver, but at the beginning of his quote, he said, in terms of cornerback or wide receiver, my answer is yes to Travis Hunter. And so that kind of lends itself to, hey, we're going to let him probably fail at one of these positions before we say that he is not one of these positions. Do we think that Andrew Berry and the Cleveland Browns think that do we believe that they're viewing him more as a wide receiver because of their roster or because of Travis Hunter himself?
I think that's the beauty of him. That's the beauty of Travis Hunter, is that you could put him anywhere you need, right? The Browns probably need more help at wide receiver than they do right now at corner, so Travis Hunter can play wide receiver for them. So it's incredible. This shows he's the greatest two-way player of all time, right? He might be wide receiver 1 in this draft. He might be CB1 in this draft as well. Like, he is that special football player.
I think Max just hit it at the end right there, is that you might consider him the best player at each position, and he's both of those things in one body, right? So any team could kind of flex him wherever they need to, or if they feel like receiver is a primary position, I think he he could be an elite receiver in the league. He's a special athlete, as we know. I think he's an underrated route runner. His football IQ is extremely high, but even as a corner, he was top 10 in the country in zone coverage grade and man coverage grade. So I think the Browns do have a need on both sides of it, but if they feel like he's a better weapon at receiver to add to Jerry Jeudy and the passing game while they still continue to find a quarterback and rebuild the rest of the offense, I totally get it. I get it either way because he's an elite talent on both sides of the ball.
I do think it's interesting looking at these two teams. I would tell you that the more dire need for the Titans between corner and wide receiver is corner. So I can understand why they're primarily looking at him as a corner. And I would say the opposite for the Browns. I would say that they're more dire need, with a team that has Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson, and
Greg Newsome.
Thank you, Greg Newsome. I think that they have a lot of cornerback talent there, so they are much more heavily, they need much more at the wide receiver position than the cornerback position. But I do think if he is primarily viewed as a corner, which I believe he is, or he should be, I am team have him as a cornerback first. I agree with you. I do think that hurts his odds to go number one overall, just because there's not a lot of corners that go number one overall, but a wide receiver, it's a little bit flashier. You hear so much more about guys like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase than you do even like a Patrick Surtain or even a Sauce Gardner, those guys like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at just financial compensation, the top receivers are getting paid $30 to $35 million a year. The top corners are getting paid $20 to $25 million a year.
Right.
And there's never been a corner ever has ever gone number one.
And you got to follow the money if you want to talk about where the NFL values certain positions.
That's an interesting part with Travis Hunter, too, is that if he has to play one or the other, financially, it makes more sense to play wide receiver. So we'll see what he does, but it's a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, curious to what everybody thinks in the chat, whether or not they believe that Hunter is a wide receiver or a corner, or if they feel that playing cornerback really does hurt his chances to be that number one overall pick, and maybe that's not why he's not committing to anything. We're going to stay at the number one overall pick because Mike Borgonzi, the new general manager for the Tennessee Titans, he also had an interesting tidbit when he said that they have received calls for number one overall. So my question to you guys is, who do you think they have received calls from so far?
My first assumption would be Las Vegas from number 6.
Okay.
A team that would think about maybe making a splash if they can fix everything else in free agency, and maybe find some running backs later in the class. Then you're talking about, okay, we've got a big hole to fill at quarterback. They had one of the worst quarterback situations in the league this past year. Really haven't been able to replace Derek Carr's production from all his time there. They're looking to start fresh. Now, again, this could all be a moot point after free agency if they go after a Sam Darnold or maybe a Matt Stafford or another veteran, but you're talking about a team that desperately needs a franchise quarterback. And we know Shedeur Sanders has been pretty tightly tied to Mark Davis and Tom Brady. He's worked with Brady in workouts in the past and things like that.
Yep.
That seems to be the connection made. So I think the one thing we have to remember with trades, especially for teams trading up and especially for quarterbacks, is one, their own opinions of these players and how highly they value them, and two, the perception of how highly the teams in front of them value them, because let's say none of those 5 teams in front of them particularly like Shedeur Sanders, but they do, then they could just wait till 6. So there's a lot of layers that go into making those sorts of trades, and that's why they happen on draft night most of the time.
I'm looking at MetLife Stadium. I'm looking at the Giants and the Jets, because the Giants at number 3 overall, we already seen with John Mara, the Giants owner before, has basically said, hey, we need to get a quarterback. And this is Brian Dable and Joe Shane's kind of last try at this before he might move on and get a new GM and coach. They are desperate for a quarterback. If they want to guarantee themselves a quarterback in this draft, Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, you got to get a top 2 pick. Adam Schefter had a pretty interesting report today. I saw that the thing he's most confident in this draft is the Browns taking a quarterback at number 2 overall.
Yeah,
so I don't know about that, but like if you're the that might be also smoke from the Browns saying, "Hey, Giants, come up and get your guy," as well. So that, and also like I said, the Jets before the Jets. Aaron Glenn was kind of talking about his podium today, just how he's kind of sick of talking about quarterback right now. Maybe that was some smoke on his end, maybe saying, okay, we're trying to get up and get either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders because they are moving on from Aaron Rodgers.
I would say that the Giants are one of those teams that have called. I know that I said earlier, Joe Shane said, we'll start having those conversations this week. I wonder if that was a little bit of a smokescreen as well, because I could certainly see the Giants as one of those teams who has at least called up to number 1 and gauged what the interest is in them potentially moving back. So I thought it was very interesting just to hear Borgonzi say, we have already gotten calls about number 1 overall, which means those are only going to intensify as we get closer to April. And somebody is worth number one overall in this class, right? If you've got multiple teams, you're fielding multiple calls for number one overall. And again, maybe it's Borgonzi playing, the smoke screen game. Maybe that could be. But if you are already getting calls, then even if it's not for Cam Ward or Shadur Sanders, it could be for Abdul Carter.
Yep.
It could be for Travis Hunter, right? I mean, that number one overall pick is worth something if you're already getting some calls and some teams are already trying to figure out what it would take to get up there. I'm going to go a little bit further down. You were talking about the Las Vegas Raiders. Their new general manager, John Spytek, was at the podium today. Talked about a lot of things. In particular, he said he plans to emulate the Eagles' recipe. Strong defense, strong up front, leaning on the run game. Vic Tafer was the one who tweeted that out and who I got that information from here for this show. And he's very interesting. And I think that it brings one Ashton Jeanty into play at number 6 overall. And I know that some Raiders fans might be saying that is crazy. Why would we draft a running back before a quarterback? Look, if you don't love any of the quarterbacks in this class and you know it's a little bit of a multi-year rebuild here, especially with hiring a new head coach in Pete Carroll, why wouldn't you just go get the players that you think are great? So my question is 6 where Ashton Jeanty's range begins here in this draft?
I certainly think so. I think it's entirely possible they go that route. They already have a pretty solid offensive line. I would say other than Brock Bowers, that's the best part of their offense. So they're set up to run the ball well, but they were dead last in the league in rushing grade last year. One of the worst rushing grades as a team that we've seen in several years. So when you talk about the Raiders trying to jumpstart their offense, and there's been rumors about them going the veteran quarterback route too. Russell Wilson, maybe Matt Stafford they're making a call on, possibly maybe Sam Darnold in that mix as well. So if they go with a veteran quarterback, it's much more likely that they fix either A, the running back position with Jeanty, or B, go in the secondary and fix a coverage unit that was dead last in coverage grade as well. So I think they do have several options, and Jeanty is one of them. Spytek did talk about what he looks for in running backs. He wants them to have instincts, vision, and be hard to tackle. Those things all describe Ashton Jeanty pretty well considering what we saw him do, especially this season.
Yeah, I do think the range starts at number 6 overall, and Dalton's right. Like they did have the worst rushing grade in the NFL this past year, and when you have a blue chip player like Ashton Jeanty available at number 6 overall, I mean, we saw Saquon Barkley go number 2 overall. We saw Bijan Robinson go in the top 10. That's the level I think Ashton Jeanty is on as a prospect. I think he's with Saquon and Bijan as the best running back prospects we've seen in recent memory. So the range does start, I think, at number 6 for Ashton Jeanty.
I think that certainly Ashton Jeanty is worth the conversation about them at number 6 overall, but just if Raiders fans are kind of pulling their hair out here, that also describes a lot of other running backs in this class, right? I mean, like an Amarian Hampton, certainly. Cam Scadaboo, who we were just talking 5-10 minutes ago, feels like the forgotten man. It's like people forgot what Cam Scadaboo did this past college football season.
That's the story of his life, honestly.
I guess so, but look, I don't expect him to come out in Indianapolis and have a great 40 time or jump really high or really far or have great agility drills or anything, but he's just so damn difficult to bring down. And John Spytek himself said that's sometimes what matters the most from the running back position. He's like, look, if they run a 4-3, great, but if I can get a player that's really hard to bring down every time I hand the ball off to him, like that's exactly what you would want. I mean, Quinshon Judkins can be in that conversation as well. I think Devin Neal is in that conversation, Damian Martinez, right? I mean, there's so many running backs that I think fit that billing that it doesn't have to be Ashton Jeanty at 6, but I do think the conversation in the range starts with him.
That's the problem with Ashton Jeanty going that high in the draft. It is a loaded running back class top to bottom. So you can get a really, really good running back in the 2nd, 3rd, or even 4th round, or even later than that in this draft. That is the problem with taking a running back that high, is that there are a lot of really, really talented guys you can get later on.
But even in such a deep class, he is generally considered to be clearly the best guy among a really talented group.
I think his consensus board ranking is going to be probably 4 if I had to guess.
I think he's a top 4 or 5 player overall. Absolutely.
Right. So and that's if it's the name of the game. And I wonder what the trickle down effect is going to be from what Brad Holmes is doing with the Lions. Because remember Brad Holmes' last few drafts where he's drafting Jahmyr Gibbs at 12. He's drafted Sam Laporta with a premium pick. He's drafting Jack Campbell with a premium pick. And people are just going like, what are you doing? Like, this isn't how it's done. Like, these are low ROI these aren't premium positions, and yet you're using premium assets on it. And lo and behold, a couple years later, we look at them and they have one of the best rosters in the NFL because of it. And so I wonder if a lot more teams are just going to point to what the Lions have done and how good their roster is and just say, hey, let's go more BPA than we ever have before, just to get those types of players that we want. If that's the case, it opens the door for a guy like Ashton Genty to be a top 10 pick, and potentially even with the Las Vegas Raiders. So before we move on to the next one, because we got a lot more clips, we got a lot more things that we learned here on day one of the Combine. Question for everybody out there: what does your child's future success look like for you? Maybe it's them traveling the world. Maybe it's them having a job that they absolutely love, something that they're passionate about. Whatever it is, you can help them achieve that with a kids investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life. By making a contribution to your child's future today, you can help give them the means to pursue their dreams, both big and small. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kids investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Whole thing is very easy to get started. Starts with just $20, no contribution limits on it. It's got tax advantages. Funds are SIPC insured up to $500,000, plus there are no commission fees, just a low flat monthly maintenance fee. Funds can be used on basically anything. When they're younger, maybe it's tuition, tutors, music classes, sporting events, whatever. And then when they're a little bit older, hey, maybe it's helping them buy their first car, buy their first house, start a business, or just travel the world, whatever that looks like. Whole thing is is online and super easy, like I said, to set up, and you can just monitor those investments right from your phone. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child's future today. Then meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That is meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios are managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. So the Atlanta Falcons, the next team that I want to talk about here. Terry Fontenot got up to the podium today. Raheem Morris was here today as well. So the general manager and head coach were sort of making the rounds, doing the interviews. But it was a tweet by Orlando Ledbetter, who works for the AJC, who covers the Atlanta Falcons, which is really the more eye-popping thing, I think, of anything. And he had a tweet, and it said the Falcons have to have a very big defensive draft. None of the Falcons' assistant offensive coaches will be attending the Combine. And the Falcons are using all 45 of their interview meetings on defensive players. If that is the case, I know there's smoke screens. I don't know if you can smoke screen not interviewing a single offensive player. And obviously, drafting Michael Penix Jr. the way that they did, how well they have success on offense, the offensive line, we have boasted how good of an offensive line they are. Bijan Robinson's emergence last year, having a guy like Drake London, hoping you get that next step with Kyle Pitts. Darnell Mooney giving him a little something to it, receiver. They seem pretty good there. They're pretty good. What they need to figure out is how to get a lot better on the defensive side of the ball. Really up front in the defensive line and in the secondary. What do you guys make of this report that all 45 of their meetings are with defensive players?
Well, they're drafting an offensive player, of course.
Oh, okay.
Just like they drafted,
so you just think
they drafted a quarterback last year when no one expected them to, right? That was the most shocking pick of the draft last year.
Didn't even interview him.
Exactly.
Know his name. No,
Not a clue.
I'm kidding. They
don't need to know him. It's all on tape. But no, I think yes. Is it borderline hilarious that that's the route that they're going? Because they do desperately need edge help and corner help, especially. Their pass defense has to get better if they're going to be able to be a contender in the NFC. But I don't think it takes an offensive player completely off the board, right? What if they absolutely love somebody at 15, like, say, a Luther Burden, to really strengthen that receiving core even further and just give Michael Penix every weapon he needs, right? What if Tyler Warren were to fall to 15 somehow? And maybe, I know they kind of whiffed on Kyle Pitts a few years ago, and that situation's kind of degraded, but if you had an elite talent, coaches and GMs always talk about, if there's an elite talent and a guy that we want that's at the top of our board when our selection comes. Fontenot talked about that last year. I remember somebody asking him a question about, that great offensive line, and they asked Terry Fontenot, hey, would you continue to add to it and add talented players to a position of strength? And he was like, well, yeah, I would add talent to any position of strength, even if that's the right guy that I want. Now, it turns out he was talking about quarterback. Even after signing Kirk Cousins, he went out and drafted Michael Penix. But I think if you're going best player available, you can't just take offensive guys off the board. You can't just exclude one side, because we've heard several GMs even talk about today. If you draft exclusively for need, you may be passing up those elite talents that you're going to want and make your football team better regardless of where you're at currently. So I do think, look, They don't have a ton of money to spend in free agency. They're going to be kind of bargain shopping. I do think early on they are going to go defense, but to take an offensive player completely off the board, just in case somebody falls to him, again, I think about a Tyler Warren or maybe another receiver, I don't think it should be completely off the table, but it's an interesting way to go about it.
It's a hilarious way to go about it. That's one of the most eye-popping tweets I've seen so far. And I just looked it up. 7 of the last 8 first-round picks have been on the offensive side of the football.
From Atlanta. Yeah.
So, listen, they've probably heard from a lot of draft analysts like yourself, Trev, saying, hey, this is an all-time defensive line draft. They're going to say,
defensive line
they're going
draft.
to go, you know what? Prove it. We're going to interview all of them. Every
Yeah.
single guy here at the Combine we're going to talk to. James Pierce Jr., come on down. If he's there for the Atlanta Falcons at 15 overall, that would be a home run pick for
Feels
them,
like somebody that they should absolutely have on their radar. I think cornerbacks as well, it depends sort of what scheme that they want to be able to run, if they want to get more aggressive. But if a Will Johnson or a Jahdae Barron sort of makes to him at 15, I think that makes a lot of sense for them as well. You could draft corner, I think, on day 2 and day 3. I think there's a lot of good ones in this class, but there's good defensive linemen too. So Terry Fontenot also was asked, is Grady Jarrett untouchable? Because Grady Jarrett, along with Jesse Bates, feels like one of the few impact players that they actually had to count on over the last couple of years, and he wouldn't really commit to it. He said, no, he's not untouchable. And Raheem Morris sort of went on, I believe it was in a different interview, talked about how Grady Jarrett, he does so much for this defensive line, but what the decision on him and whether or not he'll be on the team, it's more of a business decision than it is a talent decision. So it kind of feels like maybe it might even be past opening the door to letting Grady Jarrett walk or cutting him. It might be more than that. So that defensive line might even get a little bit thinner moving on from him. So I think defensive line, in my opinion, is the big target for them in the middle of the first round.
I mean, you look at it, I just looked at their edge group. In 4 of the last 5 years, they've had bottom 3 graded edges in the NFL. So it's been a problem for the Atlanta Falcons for like a half decade now, the edge rusher position. So I think edge is probably most likely, but like you said too, like Will Johnson, his stock for some reason is falling, it seems like lately. That could be a really good pick to pair along with AJ Terrell in the secondary.
Another interesting tidbit that we got from the podiums involves the Denver Broncos from their head coach, Sean Payton. He said having a tight end or a running back as a joker position, which is his terminology of, we'll hear this all the time, like on the defensive side of the ball, like, a jack backer or a money backer or a star, whatever it is. It's just this versatile player you're able to play him in the slot. They could play against tight ends and running backs. Well, I guess Sean Payton's joker position on offense is sort of the counter or the mirror of that. So getting a player that's extremely versatile to be able to play tight end or slot wide receiver or maybe running back out of the backfield that can do a little of all of those things. Obviously, you're not going to have a running back who lines up at tight end, but maybe a mix of a tight end who could line up as a slot receiver or a running back who could line up as a slot receiver, something like that. He said having that joker position helps specifically in the middle of the field, and said adding a player like that is a priority for them. So when you look at the Denver Broncos, they're currently picking at number 20. What are some players who come to mind that could be targets? Because when I hear about that, it doesn't sound like something that, they'll draft their joker in the 3rd round.
No.
Like if you want a player like this and you talk about them being a priority, to me, that's a first-round guy. You don't really get the versatility and the talent level to be able to have that kind of an impact after round 1, maybe in round 2 if you're drafted early in round 2. But I really do think that as Sean Payton spoke on this position and this draft strategy, to me, that is what we are doing in the first round, specifically at number 20. So what are some players in this draft class that you think are realistic options for them at number 20 that could be considered that joker type of an offensive position?
I think there's 4 names I think of, because I don't know that he's necessarily looking at one position so much as a player who can make his offense, 1, more versatile, and 2, more explosive. So maybe it's a running back. They don't really have a workhorse running back in that offense, and Javonte Williams is a free agent. If for any reason, positional value and things of that nature, that Ashton Jinty were to fall to number 20, I think Sean Payton would think about that. He's a dynamic runner. He's an excellent receiver. He was a receiver in high school, and he had the highest receiving grade in college football in 2023.
Yeah, he like 600 receiving yards.
Yeah, I mean, he's got receiver skills. He can line up anywhere on the field. I think about maybe a wide receiver like a Luther Burden who can really win after the catch. He's got explosive speed. He can get downfield. You can hand him the ball. You've made a Deebo Samuel comp to him in the past. And then I look at the 2 tight ends as well. Now, I don't know if Tyler Warren would drop all the way to 20, but we saw everything that he did in Penn State's offense this year, even all the way down to being a wildcat quarterback and even lining up in center and catching a touchdown against USC. And then Colston Loveland as somebody who can win in the passing game from any alignment. So I think at any of the skill positions, Sean Payton's going to go over his options, and I think he just wants a Swiss Army knife to make this offense more versatile. He felt like at times it was a bit stiff last year, despite the success and despite Bo Nix's success and making the playoffs and all that. He feels like if they get a matchup problem from anywhere on the field, their offense will get a lot better.
Yeah, I think those are the four names that come to mind for me as well. I mean, and Emeka Egbuka is a guy that I really like to go into that Sean Payton offense because, like, what they need is a guy that can win underneath for them. And I think Emeka Egbuka could really win underneath for Bo Nix in that offense. And we knew how effective he was at Oregon when throwing underneath. So Emeka Egbuka doesn't really fit the versatile chess piece that those other four do, but that's another guy. I personally, I loved hearing that from Sean Payton because I think their biggest need right now is get a wide receiver or a tight end to help complement Courtland Sutton in that offense. So hearing him say that, I'm with you, Trev. I think it's a priority and probably will be their number 20 overall pick.
You know, I know that I said that it's probably going to have to be like a priority pick for them at number 20 if they're really going to address this. But because I want to flex the PFF big board, I do want to talk about, like, okay, well, what if they address it a little bit later? They do have a second-round pick.
Savion
I believe
Williams.
it is pick 51. So, like, Savion Williams sort of comes to mind as that, like, super versatile player who, you know, I think that he's going to test like an absolute monster this week if he is going through all of the testing drills. He's like 6'5", 220 pounds. I mean, like, this dude's an absolute monster, and he's so athletically gifted. They use him a lot like Colorado used Laviska Shenault. And I know Laviska Shenault didn't have the best pro career, but man, you talk about a guy who has a lot of potential athletically. That could fit the bill. I think about Jack Besh too, right?
Yep.
Think about how good Jack Besh is over the middle and how good he has been over the middle during his time at LSU, during his time at TCU, what we saw when we were in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. Like, he's sort of got that bigger wide receiver body to where, okay, he might not play tight end for you, but he could play in condensed sets close to the line of scrimmage as sort of like a pseudo tight end. He's just not attached to the line of scrimmage. So I think Jack Besh also fits that billing. Elijah Arroyo is the last guy that I'll bring to the table because he is that tight end slot receiver. If you don't get Colston, like, let's say Colston Levin and Tyler Warren are even gone, and you really want a player like that who comes from the tight end position, to me, and Elijah Arroyo from Miami, again, you know, we talked about what a great year he had as a wide receiver, how he was the best receiving tight end of any of the tight ends that we saw in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. I think as a day two option to maybe get this joker position for the Broncos, Elijah Arroyo is somebody whose name I'd throw out there as well.
I'll throw a couple more tight ends out there. Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green. He was
because of the
incredibly versatile player,
right.
And the Falcons used him in all sorts of ways. He had a record-shattering season. He had over 1,500 receiving yards. The previous record for a tight end was 1,350. So he shattered the tight end record, led the nation in yards after the catch and receiving yards. Receivers and tight ends. The other one is Dalton's guy, and ironically my guy too, because he went to my alma mater, Rondé Gadsden from Syracuse as well. He kind of is he a receiver? Is he a tight end? Dalton thinks he's a little bit of both. That could be a guy maybe like a fourth or fifth round.
Do you think he's an over the middle of the field weapon though?
I do.
I
think he is.
Yeah.
I think he's more of like a sideline receiver.
I think when you talk about him being a matchup problem and the amount that they relied on him at Syracuse, right? Did he have the most targets other than maybe Fannin and Warren of any tight end in the country? It was up. I think he had close to, if not over, 100 targets.
He was the third most valuable tight end after those two. Yeah.
Tight end.
Tight end.
He's 247 now.
Tight end.
He's 247 at the Triangle.
He did play in line more this year than he had in the past.
Ultimate has him as a tight end.
I'm not 7 snaps.
When you talk about
you're hating on the orange right now.
Yeah, you're just hating on 10. You're hating on 10 wins.
He's not a tight end in my opinion. That doesn't mean he can't ball. He can't play. He's not a tight end.
But really, what Sean Payton is looking for, though, okay, so you're not going to ask Gadsden to block very often, and I understand that, right? But I mean, there is this concept of having a wide tight end that's more traditional and can block and do the things in line, and then somebody like Gadsden. I mean, we see it like say in Cincinnati with Mike Gesicki this year. We know Mike Gesicki's kind of got the tight end thing where he's more of a big slot and the receiving weapon primarily, but I think he could be that type of playmaker where you go, okay, this is a legitimate matchup that he's still, like Max mentioned, he's 6'5" and 247. That's a problem on the outside for a guy who moves pretty well at that size. One more guy, too, another ACC guy I want to throw in there at running back, Brashard Smith as well. When you're talking about a joker out of the backfield from SMU.
He played wide receiver,
He played wide receiver at Miami,
Yep.
moved to running back when he went to SMU, and he was still the best receiving back in the country, along with being able to handle some of the workload between the tackles. I don't think he would do that full time in the NFL, but you talk about a change of pace guy you could get maybe late in round 3 or in round 4. I think that's somebody Payton could target also.
I want to move on to a different team. I want to talk about the Miami Dolphins here. So Mike McDaniel stepped up to the podium, and offensive line was an issue for this team all year long. It felt like they tried to get a little bit cute, after losing Robert Hunt and kind of just saying, hey, we're not really going to replace him. We're going to keep the same guys along there. I know they signed Aaron Brewer, but they had worries along the offensive line. It just didn't feel like they addressed them the way they needed to. I know they drafted Patrick Paul, but that was more of a sort of a long-term thing there. He said at the podium that they are operating as if Teron Armstead is not back with the team this upcoming season. Now, he said that he hasn't made a decision yet on, whether or not he's going to play or retire, but he said time's kind of ticking here in order for us to get that answer, and we have to operate as if he's not going to be there. So obviously, they do have Patrick Paul, but Armstead was far and away their most effective offensive lineman last year. And so you can't realistically just say like, oh, we got Patrick Paul, we'll be good to go. To me, if you are operating as if Armstead is not there, you already had issues along the offensive line when Armstead was there. So does this lock in an offensive line pick for them at number 13?
So, Max, on a count of three, when we heard this, all right, what was the name that both of us immediately thought of? 1, 2, 3. Calvin Banks
Jr.
That's
If
immediately
he's there, you got to take
that's
him.
immediately where my mind goes with that. Is if
you
he
guys should
doesn't
do a podcast together. That was good.
I think this
We're working on it.
report broke, and Dalton and I were like opposite sides of the convention center, and we just like yelled Calvin
We,
Banks.
we, we literally just like all the way over. That's just we were like, oh, that sounds like a place Calvin Banks should go. But between them and San Francisco, those are the two that I kind of think about. But no, I mean now, look, you mentioned it. Miami's offensive line, in times when Armstead was hurt and missing games, they functioned at a completely lower level without him. He just made the entire unit better. He was still one of the best left tackles in football. And if he does retire, they already had holes at both guard spots where their two starting guards are free agents. Now they're just left with Aaron Brewer at center and at right tackle. I'm losing it right now. Austin Jackson at right tackle. It's just now you have three starters, including your very best one at left tackle, all potentially gone, and a cap situation that is not good. They don't have much cap space to work with. Let's say if they wanted to sign a guy like Alaric Jackson from the Rams, they may not have the money for that. So they're really needing now to nail the trenches in this draft. And again, I think somebody like Calvin Banks, maybe an Armand Membu. It really feels like now, especially with the premium on protecting Tua, the offensive line is the biggest area of concern now for the Dolphins, and it already was this past season. The pass protection, especially in the drop-back game, has been an issue for a couple of years.
Yeah.
So just to expand on that a little bit, Ian Rappaport tweeted out that Teron Armstead is taking his contract down to the minimum, and he's scheduled to make $28.6 million. So basically, that allows the Dolphins to make all the moves that they want to make as if he won't be there. Still gives him time to decide whether or not he will be there, but he's making the minimum now, whereas before he was supposed to make $29 million. So I think he's likely not going to be there next year. And then, I think if Calvin Banks, if the 49ers do not take him at number 11 overall, you sprint that card in if you're Miami. I think he's the best tackle in this draft, and he's a perfect fit in that zone blocking scheme.
I was going to say, I don't think he's the best tackle in this draft personally, just for my rankings, but he is pretty perfect for what the Dolphins want to do. He gives you that athleticism. He can get out on the hoof as a puller. He can work those zone blocking scheme plays. If they miss on him, the next guy that I would target, if you can get him at the top of the second round, I believe they do have a second-round pick. I'm trying to remember if they wouldn't or not. I'm checking that right here. Yeah, they do have a second-round pick. They also have a third-round compensatory pick, so they do have that, and then they got 2 fourth-round picks as well. But anyways, at number 48, I'd be trying to target Ariante Ursa. If he is there. Just a massive dude who is all about zone blocking, and he can really explode out of his stance. And so if you pass on offensive line for whatever reason the first round, I think Ariante Ursa is your target afterwards.
The other thing that was interesting, too, I can't remember who reported it, but someone said that Mike McDaniel also said that they're going to let Javon Holland test free agency.
Yeah. And we knew that was going to be the case. Because there was no deal done with him yet, it always felt like they were going to get to that point.
But it doesn't lock in, if he for some reason leaves and goes to another team, that doesn't lock in a tackle still at 13. You could take a Malachi Starks, number 13 overall for the Dolphins. So while I do think Calvin Banks Jr. should be the target for them there are some options for the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, I would shoot. I might even double up on offensive line. If let's just say those two names that we mentioned, if you get Calvin Banks Jr. in the first round, and then you draft Ariante Ursa, you have Patrick Paul who's playing at that one spot. To me, all of a sudden, the outlook of your offensive line looks completely different. If you're drafting those two players.
Who are you willing to take at 13?
for them along the offensive line.
Like who's you think
No,
is
Kelvin
worth a pick?
Banks.
And
Like
is there
13.
anyone else? Like Membu, would you take a 13?
I like
overall?
Membu for them as well.
I know
yeah,
you love
I think
Simmons,
that
too.
makes a lot of sense.
Josh Simmons.
Josh Simmons. I mean, if Jeffrey Simmons is there at 13, you get the chance to take
Yeah,
him.
they could
Obviously,
use
it's
him
great.
too, for sure.
But Josh Simmons, I felt like he was playing like the best offensive tackle in the country before he gets hurt. His knee injury is more extensive than what it was originally reported to be. I don't think it was just an ACL tear. I think it was worse than that. But if he gets back to form, and if the medicals check out with him, he reminds me of like a Christian Darrisaw. I don't think he's as powerful as a Christian Darrisaw, but man, the pre-snap stance, he's so low. He always wins with leverage. He's got great footwork. He is explosive. Like all of that leans into what Miami wants to do. So all of those offensive linemen, I think, could be targets for them and other teams that would need offensive linemen as well. All right, before we move on to a couple other things, plus we want to hit on some big NFL news, not just that we saw or that we heard at the Combine, but some players becoming available, some moving around the pro market, all that. Got to tell you guys this podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Cherry Bundy, the performance drink that is fueling the health elite revolution. Natural products and natural ingredients, which means it's got no added sugars. Those tart cherries that they are made with, it's the highest antioxidant fruit and vegetable in the world, which means it's got all kinds of incredible benefits if you're taking it. Reduces soreness, increases recovery, helps support immunity, naturally occurring melatonin that'll help improve their sleep. If you are living an active lifestyle at all whatsoever, whether it's getting your steps in every single day, just a brisk walk, maybe it's to and from work, maybe it's to and from the store, maybe it's just around the neighborhood, or whether you're really pushing your body to the limits, they've got the product for you. It's used by nearly 500 collegiate and professional sports teams, so it is used by the very best. Every single team that was playing overseas in Europe, Brazil, they had Cherry Bundy with them to help them recover and help them perform their best. The products are available at Amazon as well as retailers nationwide. Check out your local Publix, Kroger, grocery stores, whatever it is. But if you don't find it there, and if you want 20% off whatever your order is going to be, go on to cherrybuddy.com. Use the promo code PFF20, and then you get 20% off there. So they've got all sorts of different products. It's not just the ones to help you recover. They've got some stuff to give you energy before workouts. They've got products that'll specifically help you sleep, all that kinds of great stuff. Go check it out and get 20% off by using the promo code PFF20 over at cherrybundy.com. All right, we got another video here for you because before we get to some general NFL news, there's another podium session that I wanted to highlight here. Mike Vrabel, back up at the podium as head coach, no longer with the Tennessee Titans, now with the New England Patriots. He was asked about how you really build around Drake Maye, and I thought his answer was very interesting as a guy we thought would just say, hey, we're pounding the table for offensive linemen. He had a little bit of a different point of view and actually talked about a skill position player. So let's check out the video there from Mike Vrabel and hear what he said.
You have to be able to, have some guys that can help them on the edges and be able to make contested catches. And you don't have to be perfect, right? You don't have to have, perfect ball placement, right? And those are all things that we talk about, trying to support Drake, believing that he is the future of our franchise at quarterback, and been able to meet with him and talk with him and just get to know him as a person. But you have to look at the lines of scrimmage, and you look no further than the Super Bowl game where that game was clearly won at the line of scrimmage.
Getting a receiver on the edge to make up for some non-perfect passes. I wonder what wide receiver that sure sounds like here. Are we not putting enough weight into Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona, going number 4 overall, Dalton? What do you think?
I think we're not putting enough weight on it at all. And I got to think, look, part of this decision might even be, we talked about the opinions of Travis Hunter earlier. Let's just say, for the sake of hypotheticals, right, 2 of the 3 quarterbacks go first. Maybe the Browns do take an Abdul Carter. And Hunter and McMillan are both on the board for the Patriots, right? But what is their opinion of Travis Hunter? Are they another team who thinks, hey, he's a cornerback who could help us at wide receiver? Or do we just want a primetime X wide receiver who makes a quarterback's life easier? Because I think that's the theme for New England this offseason and in the future is between offensive linemen, even if they go that route, or a receiver, how do you make Drake Maye's life easier, right? Because right now it's about as hard as it could possibly be between their pass protection and their lack of weapons on the outside. McMillan is a guy, we've talked about him, compared to Drake London, compared to maybe a little bit thinner Mike Evans, a guy who can go up and get the football in an acrobatic way. He added the missed tackles forced to his game, yards after catch to his game this season. He doesn't move like a normal 6'5" wide receiver, right? And the way he can expand the strike zone, so to speak, and have that catch radius to, so Drake Maye doesn't have to be constantly perfect, right? You don't want your quarterback to have to be constantly perfect because you see what happens in those types of situations, right? I think about a Joe Burrow or even say Patrick Mahomes to win this year's Super Bowl would have had to been absolutely perfect. You don't want a young kid to have to do that. So I think McMillan would help them in a huge way and should be in every bit of consideration at number 4.
Whenever I think of Mike Vrabel and wide receivers, the first thing I think of is when the Titans traded away A.J. Brown to the Philadelphia Eagles and how unhappy he was. Yeah. So I think this is a very real possibility that getting a guy like Trevor McMillan or a Travis Hunter for Drake Maye makes a lot of sense, right? And I mentioned before, Ted McMillan over the last 2 years leads the nation in contested catches, and Dalton just mentioned it. He had the second most broken tackles this past year. The only one who had more was Luther Burden III, who is like, that is his trump card, is what he could do after the catch. Ted McMillan's behind him in broken tackles this year. So I think it's a very, very real possibility, and I personally would love the pick if they took Ted McMillan or Travis Hunter number 4.
It's hard to think about it right now, right? Because we're pre-free agency. So you look at a Patriots team that had the worst offensive line in the NFL last year. Mike Vrabel's identity and how he wants to win in both the trenches. And it's very strange to think they get out of the first round without having an improvement along the offensive line. But this is also the team that has well over $100 million to spend in free agency, and I have to imagine they're going to add at least 3 or 4 new names. Now, whether or not they are all surefire starters, they're probably not, but 2 of them probably are, and then 2 of them are probably pretty good options, whether one of them has to start or they're good rotational players. So this offensive line for New England is going to look different on draft night than it does right now. So as crazy as it may seem to talk about wide receiver at all for them at number 4, which is probably why we don't do it a lot, Mike Vrabel's kind of right there. He's with us. Hey, you know what? This could be a major move for them, and getting a player like Tetairoa McMillan, as the kids say, the combination of Drake Maye and Tetairoa McMillan would feed families. I mean, that would just be an incredible combination to watch every single week. It would make the Patriots must-watch television every single week because I think these dudes would just go off because they would have to carry this entire offense and even a defense that is still coming to form, although I do think that Mike Vrabel being there will just elevate it no matter what. But we haven't been talking about Tetairoa. We did a little bit. I feel like early parts of January, he was sometimes mocked number 4 overall, but recently he really hasn't. And now I think we get to start doing that once again.
He's fallen outside the top 20 in some mocks I've seen recently, right? I don't understand.
Stupid.
I think he's easily a top 10 player in this class, if not a top 5 player in this class. So I think his run really starts at number 4 to New England, I think.
Pete in the chat is asking about Abdul Carter because we kind of talked about him a little bit there and just overall. Carter's not working out because he's still recovering from a shoulder injury, but he's asking, have they talked about Carter dropping at all since he is injured? I don't think so.
I could tell you right now, for as many questions as Brian Callahan specifically got about Abdul Carter today and what he's looking for in an edge defender, he's still very much in consideration, I think, for the first overall pick. So he's not going to get very far beyond that, even if he gets by Tennessee.
His agent, I think, came out and said he was just cleared today to do stuff. So like that, they don't want him to go out there and work out just right after getting cleared. So he'll be doing everything at his pro day, apparently. So it sucks not seeing a freak athlete like Abdul Carter tear it up at the combine, but I don't think this affects the stock at all.
2 general managers who talked more about the offensive line were Ryan Poles of the Chicago Bears and then James Gladstone, the new general manager of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Ryan Poles, this is from Greg Rosenthal on Twitter, said that he indicated that they are ready to start spending on offensive line in free agency. So Bears fans out there who might have been clamoring it for a while, it seems that you are going to get your wish and they're going to be big spenders along the offensive line in free agency. And then James Gladstone, when he was at the podium, obviously the first time new general manager for the Jags, just hired last week, said, quote, addressing the interior offensive line is like setting the dish for the quarterback. Can be really helpful for their success. So we know that they're going to emphasize this as well. Liam Cohen, the head coach of that team, saw what a great interior offensive line was able to do for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and everything that he was able to do in the run game specifically, I think, this past season. So those are two teams that are going to be pretty heavily invested on the interior offensive line, I think, when it comes to free agency.
Well, I would hope the Bears are, because all three of their starters on the interior are all free agents. So they have to reset all three of those spots. They've got Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright both at tackle, and those are two solid young players. But that's pretty much going to be priority number one, especially for a guy like Ben Johnson, who saw how that paid off in Detroit with arguably the best offensive line in the league. But you have to protect Caleb Williams. Now, obviously, we know he's got to get rid of the ball a little bit quicker, but any young quarterback needs protection. Even a veteran, it doesn't matter if it's Patrick Mahomes we saw in the Super Bowl. If you don't protect him, he can't produce. So I think it's going to be a major priority. They're going to be at the top of the market in free agency when you talk about guys like Trey Smith and Drew Dahlman. And then that's why there's been a lot of mocks that have had Will Campbell potentially moving inside and going to the Bears at 10 as somebody who can replace one of those three spots. So I think
you think any of the three will be back? I feel like maybe Tevin. But
I think actually, for the sake of even depth, even if he's not a starter, I think Matt Pryor could actually be back as the cheapest option of the three. But
I could understand
I think
that.
they are the first guy.
If they want a starter, I feel like they'd take a chance on Jenkins. But if they just want a depth guy, Pryor.
It's the injury. So, right,
no,
you also, on top of production, you need availability from those guys. And if Jenkins is only going to play 9 games every year or 10 games every year, it's hard to continue to pay that guy premium money. The first guy I would go after is Drew Dahlman, the center from the Falcons.
Yeah,
I think he'd be an absolutely perfect fit. Yep. There are more guards than centers in this draft. Agreed. I mean, I think it's just a light center class that a lot of the better players came back to school, and we'll talk about them next year. But I think Drew Dahlman would actually be my first priority in Chicago, and then you figure out the 2 guard spots as you go.
Listen, they have a lot of money to spend, right? They have $54 million in effective cap space. If they take care of offensive line enough, I wonder if that opens the door for an edge rusher at number 10 overall or an Ashton Ginty at number 10 overall for the Chicago Bears as well. And for the Jaguars, they need help on the interior offensive line. Neither of their guards.
Brandon Scherff's a free agent.
Yes.
Mitch Morse hasn't really been the player that they've wanted him to be since signing him. So, yeah.
I wonder if Will Campbell at number 5 is an option for them now.
We keep talking defense with them at 5, but it's a reasonable assumption. Or if you're talking about maybe a trade down
it will
scenario.
happen. I think it would probably be one of the Michigan guys. If Travis Hunter's not there, probably either Mason Graham or Will Johnson.
I love Will Campbell. I just don't know if the NFL loves him as much as I do. And if you're going to take one of them at 5, you're probably going to take one of them to draft him as a tackle.
Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying. Look, I think Campbell could be a fantastic interior offensive lineman. I just don't know if a team's going to do it.
In the top 5,
Yeah, in the top 5.
So it's interesting. Yeah, I think Jacksonville, I still think they're probably going to go defense at number 5. If Travis Hunter's there, you have to take Travis Hunter for Jacksonville. But Chicago's interesting because they do have a lot of money to spend, and if they shore up all 3 of those spots, like I said, that opens the door for a different position than offensive line at number 10.
Conflicting reports here in the chat. Devin says that Dahlman's a 49er, obviously wanting him to go to their San Francisco
Which
49ers.
Also makes a ton of
sense. And then
sense.
Justin says Dahlman's staying with the Falcons. So we got some conflicting reports here.
They all make a ton of sense, but it's that same.
No, they do.
I think there's 6 or 7 teams that are going to be in on him because anybody that runs that outside zone scheme, he's as good as any center in football with it. So all those spots make sense, and there's going to be a bidding war for his services.
Let's do some roundup of on the pro market. Some news that dropped today. Commanders defensive tackle John Allen, who has 1 year remaining on his deal, informed by the franchise that he's given permission to seek a trade. That's according to Jordan Schultz. Any spots that you like as landing spots here for John Allen? I think about the Buffalo Bills, right? At Buffalo Bills, I think it makes a ton of sense for them on their interior defensive line. Maybe the Dallas Cowboys, if they feel like making a splash because of how bad they were on the interior defensive line this past season. Maybe Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati, the Bengals, could also be a spot there for John Allen with 1 year left on his deal, knowing how much better they have to get along the interior defensive line. What do you guys think about some landing spots?
San Francisco is another one that sticks out to me. They really have to rebuild that defensive tackle room, and they just need reliable players. The tough part is that Allen is coming off his 2 lowest graded seasons. So I do think, I think about San Francisco, maybe the LA Chargers as another kind of depth piece. They have a lot of free agents on their defensive line. They're trying to rebuild that, and maybe they're trying to keep guys like Poona Ford and Taylor Tart, but Allen could be an option for them too.
I think the Vikings and Texans come to mind as well as 2 teams that could use help on that defensive line. I think it's a fascinating market for him, though, because he's coming off the 2 lowest graded seasons of his career. He's over 30 years old now, and it's a loaded defensive tackle draft as well. So I wonder what his market will be like because of how good this class is at defensive tackle, but he's still obviously a very good player. That's still a starting caliber
Minnesota's a really good call there. I believe they were a bottom 4 interior pass rush team this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other one is Khalil Shakir, signed the extension with the Buffalo Bills. Just your thoughts on them, obviously devoting a lot of resources now to Khalil Shakir. I mean, he's been awesome, man. I loved him when he was at Boise State. For me, it felt I really liked him as a football player, but his production in the NFL, in my opinion, was always going to be based on where he was going to land. And obviously it's in a spot with Buffalo where, dude, look at this past year. It felt like they had so many different options, whether it was the tight ends or trading for Amari Cooper or drafting Keon Coleman. And Khalil Shakir was the guy who was just the most productive and the most reliable for them, and they certainly don't want to lose that. So any thoughts on Shakir there?
And I think it's a good contract at $15 million a year. He's a reliable wide receiver 2 type of guy. You hope Keon Coleman maybe emerges on the outside, or maybe they add something later in free agency or find a way to get, another asset in that receiving room. But I always thought when they first drafted him that he would be a natural replacement for all the production that Cole Beasley gave them early in Josh Allen's career, and it's turned out he's done that. So I think, Shakir, he's definitely earned it. He's been their most consistent receiver over the last 2 years. He does a lot of different things for them, and I think he's well worth that $15 million a year.
I'm with you, Trev. I loved him coming out of Boise State. I thought he was one of the most underrated players in the draft. So it's so cool kind of seeing him get a big deal now. And yeah, he's been like that underrated player his entire career, feels like, in Buffalo. You mentioned it before, like he's kind of forgotten about in that receiving corps, and yet he ended up being the most productive one out of all of them. He is a really, really good slot receiver. He has terrific hands, makes some outrageous catches out there. I think Khalil Shakir is a really good football player.
Somebody in the chat is saying, hold on, I got to pull it back up. Allen being 30 years old, because John Allen's 30 years old in the last year of his deal this year. Don't know how desirable he will be, especially to the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't know. I feel like if the Cincinnati Bengals really want to turn things around pretty quick, if they kind of see the sins of letting these other guys walk and realizing how big of an impact that was over the compounding couple of years for them, especially along the defensive line, they might be willing to, because it feels like if the Commanders are giving him permission to seek a trade, not that they're going to give him away from nothing, but I don't think it's going to cost a ton for him to get out of there. So Cincinnati really could just say, like, hey, 1 year rental kind of a thing. Like, we just got to get better along the defensive line. And if the Bengals want to really compete next year, it's a good way to jumpstart it a little bit. And I don't even think that trading for a John Allen means if Walter Nolan's on the board for you at 17, you're not picking him. I think you could absolutely double dip there and set up a pretty good interior defensive line.
I think it's the idea that, okay, let's say it costs you a 5th-round pick. Is a 5th-round pick that we're going to take this year going to be more productive than Jonathan Allen when we're obviously trying to win right now with Joe Burrow, with Jamar Chase, with T. Higgins? I think you would still make the case that Allen's a better player than just about anything they would get in, say, the 5th round. So I think, especially for a team like the Bengals, who should be looking at every avenue available to improve that defense, because that's really what's keeping them from being a serious contender.
The finances are going to be interesting with them, though, because they got to pay T. Higgins, they got to pay Jamar Chase, and they got to pay Trey Hendrickson. So that's going to be interesting to see how you add up, $15 million of what Jonathan Allen's making. I don't know how that would work financially, but he would help out that D-tackle room a lot. And yeah, you mentioned it. If they draft a D-tackle in the top 20, they still have Chris Jenkins Jr. there as well. Just helping those guys develop, I think it would be huge to have that kind of veteran presence there.
Last thing, Jeff's asking, any chance Jack Sawyer sneaks into the first round? We obviously didn't talk about a lot of prospects here today. We'll get to those guys as the combine kind of rolls on here. But I think it's a big week for Jack Sawyer when it comes to overall athleticism, because I think that he's a high floor football player, but in terms of how impactful that he will be as a pro, I think he's got to kind of prove what kind of an athlete he is this week. And if he does not test well, I think there's a legitimate chance that we're talking about him late 2nd round, 3rd round even. But if he tests really well, then you start to trust some pretty solid grades from him over the last couple of years. What do you guys think on Jack Sawyer?
He's such a fundamentally sound player that I think he's still likely to go in the top 50. Love his run defense tape. I think he's a solid enough and a high-effort pass rusher that, I think it's going to depend, too, on – you see every team's philosophy when it comes to drafting. And that's even a bit of what you try to get out of them at these podiums is, what are you looking for? A higher upside guy, a higher ceiling guy that might be a little bit of a project, or somebody more like Jack Sawyer, who for a fact is a good football player, even though he's not on the athletic level of, say, an Abdul Carter or a James Pierce Jr. So part of it's going to depend on, if somebody late in the 1st round has a preference for that type of high floor player and they want a well-rounded 4-3 defensive end like that, then they could take him late in the 1st. But you mentioned it, the testing everything's going to be important.
We have a metric at PFF called game athleticism score that measures your speed, agility, everything on the field. He was a 97th percentile athlete. I think he's a very good athlete. And he was a top 5 recruit coming out of high school. That's basically only based off your athleticism coming out. I think he'll do just fine. My hot take, Trev, I might have him edge 3 in this draft behind.
Okay, so you got him clearly in the first round.
I really value the guys who have high floors, like Dalton just said, and he's just been such a productive player as a pass rusher and run defender. Not the most exciting player, but like Dalton said, he does everything right. I love Jack Story. I'd be willing to take a first-round pick on him.
All right, I lied. I got one more because Brody in the chat says, what are the Carolina Panthers? Nobody ever talks about us. Let's talk about the Carolina Panthers here for a second. Sure. One, I was on the Carolina Panthers broadcast with Anish and just talking about their options at number 8 and some players that they could have there, so you guys can go check that out if you want to. But here on this show, what do you think about the Carolina Panthers at number 8? You think it's edge rusher no matter what? I think if Ted McMillan's there at number 8, he's the one guy that I would go, okay, that's the only offensive player that I would even remotely think about for them at number 8. But what do you guys think? What do you think about Carolina?
I mean, I agree. The top priority this entire offseason, not just the draft, has to be fixing a defense that was easily the lowest graded in the NFL this year all the way around. I believe they were I think they were just the 4th team ever to give up 3,000 yards rushing this season. So they need to rework. To me, if your name is not Derek Brown or J.C. Horn, you're replaceable in this Panthers defense. And they're going to be, I do wonder in free agency even, if they take kind of the quantity over quality approach, kind of like the Washington Commanders did last year, where they signed a bunch of guys on 1- and 2-year deals just to get credible starting players in there, right? Because they need to raise the floor of this defense. The offense is getting better. We saw Bryce Young get hot down the stretch last season, but if you're going in there giving up 32 points a game, you stand no chance no matter who your quarterback is, no matter what weapons you have. So the defense is going to be the first priority, and then the McMillan conversation is interesting because we've talked about, do they need a weapon? Not necessarily. But if they got the weapon, right, they don't have that wide receiver 1 type of guy. They still have Adam Thielen. They have Jalen Coker emerging, Xavier Legette they drafted last year. But if they get one of those guys that's a difference maker, then it makes the conversation at 8 very interesting. But I would expect most of the focus in free agency, and especially in the deeper parts of this draft, to be on the defensive side.
My boy J.C. Allen said, no Bucks talk, Trev? Sheesh. All right, fine. You want Bucks talk? Here we go. Okay, the Bucks are going to be at number 19. They're going to trade back into the middle parts of the 20s, and they're going to draft Donovan Ezra in the first round. You happy? There we go,
and then draft 32 next year, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. When Baker wins the Super Bowl. Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate everybody watching the show. If you don't subscribe to the show already, please do so. It really means a lot to us. We're going to be coming to you every single day here at the Combine, giving you all sorts of great information like this. And certainly when the drills start to get underway and the players start to talk, we're going to give you as much information as we possibly can. We're going to tell you not just what they said, but what it means for the 2025 NFL Draft. So please, if you are not subscribed to the show and the YouTube channel, we would love for you to do that. Like the video as well. It really helps us out here on this show. We're going to be back around the same time tomorrow for another recap section for Dalton Wasserman, Max Chadwick. I'm Trevor Sikkema saying thank you so much for watching. See you guys tomorrow.